is well. Hallelujah. I'm a little drunk this morning, so you have to excuse me. Sure. On a Wednesday night before the service even started, the Lord had been telling me throughout the week, all is well, all is well, all is well. And He told me to write it down. And it wasn't until later towards the end of the service that pastor said, you know, in the kingdom, all is well. And he brought up the story of Mary and Martha. And you see, Martha, she's the one that represents those, you know, when we start looking at everything around us and you're worried, you know, even presenting ourselves of this truth to other people, you know, is my house clean enough for them to see? Is everything in order that they can see me? But, you know, Martha, she went beyond that and she sat at the feet of Jesus. And when she was there, you know, she found herself humbled there. And, you know, I heard this morning, we were listening to Michelle O'Donnell, the one that wrote those books of Monkeys and Dragons, and, you know, she started talking about the humbleness. And that when you have the humbleness of God and the humility, and you're there, you know, you're not worried about what I can gain for myself, but what can I share with the body of God? What can I share in the truth of God? That when you have humility, that you're not worried about anything, that you have those dove's eyes where you're not looking to the left or to the right, but you're only focused on Him, and that's all you want to share with others is with Him. And you know, we're all Marys. At times, we think that we're Martha, but you know, when all is well, that's where we're convinced to a complete humbleness in Him, that nothing else can exist but Him, and that we're not worried about what other people think or what they do in our lives, but all we know is that it's Him that controls every situation. And you know, I looked up that word well because when the Lord told me to write down those words, He said underline the word well and look it up later. So I looked it up in the dictionary, and here's some of the definitions. And the first one was a spring or a fountain. We already know that the Lord is the well. And the other one is to rise up and to flow forth. And the third definition was good or proper manner. And the fourth was becoming intimate or closely with someone. And the fifth one that I saw was being prosperous. And the next one was being free from disease. And the very last one was being fortunate. You know, all of those explain all the conditions of God, even in the natural realm. When you explain God to someone, you can just look up every definition of well and explain it to him, because, you know, He's the worder of the Word that washes away every worry and every care, and He causes us to rise up and to flow forth. And He causes us to go into a good and prosperous manner. And the more we know Him, the more we seek the truth of Him, the more intimate and closely we become with Him, and the more blessed we come from Him, and the more of the realization that we realize that we are free from all disease, and that we don't even have to, you know, rise above it, as she was saying this morning as well. We don't even have to rise above it, but we just don't even let it exist in our lives. And then, of course, if we are well in Him, we're fortunate. We're fortunate to know Him in the truth, where we don't have to be bombarded by the cares of the world. Because you see, in the religious world, that's what they see, is that you have to be a servant, and that you have to work your way and make yourself look well instead of actually be well on the inside. And you see, there's no doubting when all is well. You see the finished work. Your faith has risen beyond normal circumstance. There is nothing that can upset you. No one that can accept you. You are fixed in your mind, your body, your emotions, and the spirit. You can't even see the natural around you. You are the one that has the head up in the clouds, where you're a window of the dove's eyes, that you're not swaying to the left or to the right. You're so determined that there's nothing that can bend you. You're unbending. You're seeing in the Spirit you've seen in the Spirit how it shall be, and nothing can move you off course. You're a steady ship in the water of His Word. And when you speak it, it is well. This is where the time of midnight, midnight is where the changing takes place. midnight and noon, those are both 12 o'clock, and 12 o'clock is divine government. But you see, at that time of divine government is where the change into the new day takes place. That you move from one time to another time. And we speak it forth, When this all is well comes, we don't just speak it, but we dance it forth. And then we worship in His glory, and it comes forth. We enter every new realm and higher up in Him, and it becomes well and more well and more well. That's all that we can come into in our train of thought, into our whole being. When someone asks you, I heard that your son was in the gutter and that he was dying, and you say, no, I don't know what you're talking about as well. And there's no separation that can take place, when we come into this realm, that we're fully intimate into Him. Our husband, that's where He takes us. When it's well, you're in the bedchamber with Him. Yeah. And He makes you so much Him that's all anybody can see is Him. They say, wait, I thought that was Kim, but all I see is Jesus. Right. You can't tell the difference between us. Hallelujah. All there is a truth there. All that they see is the patterned sun. All you can be is in that higher realm where He's covered you and He's protected you so much with Him that's all that there is Him. Now, I want to read from Song of Solomon 6 this morning, in verse 9. And you can go ahead and turn there, but I'm going to read it from the Amplified because I liked it a little better in the Amplified. And it says, "Let my dove, my undefiled and perfect one." Okay, so when you're in Him, if He sees Him, He doesn't see any flaw. So don't even think that you can back up any where you can't be well, because it's still there. And it says they stand alone, and when they stand alone, that means above them all. So you've risen, even though we're of the body, when we're unified, we're still one, so we're still standing above. And she is the only one of her mother. And Jesus is our mother. So came straight from Him, like Jesus Himself. Like He only came from, naturally speaking, He only came from His mother. And she is the choice one of her who bore her. The daughters saw her and called her blessed and happy, meaning well. And yes, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her. So the other ones that were in the truth, when they see you, they praise and lift you up and say, well, you are. And even the concubines, the ones that are even the whores of religion, they see you and they see you well, and that they want to rise above and see that you're the choice one. For you see, when the Lord has revealed that it's well with you, you become set apart, lifted into the higher realm, where all you know is that you are His and He is yours, and there is no other. That is why we cannot be moved by the past, the present, or the negative futures that others try to place in front of you. I heard, I think it was Kelly Varner said, someone keeps, saying, well, you say it's well, but there's, things can rise up, That's where you tell them, my ears are not garbage cans. Don't give me that. Right. I'm going to keep in this state. You can't let others bother you at all. That you have to seek Him, that He's the one that's bringing you forth, that He's the one speaking to you. Yeah. And no matter what the well is over, no matter what you see that it's well in, whether it's in your body, in your finances, in another matter that you see that you want to be changed, only His life can spring forth out of His water. I'm thinking back to that one Thursday night prayer meeting that we had, and we were moving in the Spirit, and everybody, different people were coming up, and I don't like to go up in front of the mic, but he was the first one, and he told us to walk out on the water, but he kept telling us over and over to walk out on the water, to step out in faith. And when you're convinced of this faith, that's when your spirit speaks to you. Suke, that's what soul is, the woman, that it shall be well, and it is well. So, right there,
even taken to the well of the water. When we step out in faith on that water, on his well, that's where he keeps washing away everything that's there to even bother us to think. When those thoughts, you're convinced, and sometimes those thoughts will come against your mind. That's where you just tell your mind, I just tell my mind to shut up. Just so that you stay in that convincement, because see, that's what faith is. Even in, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So, you don't have to see it completely in the natural to get yourself into that state, because there's a convincement. And the one thing that I want to break down this morning is I want you to turn to 2 Kings 4. And this is where Elisha, starting in verse 8, was with the Shunammite woman. You see, where Shunem was, this is an interesting story, because where Shunem was, that place meant quiet. So the prophet went to the place of quiet to find himself some rest. He would usually, Elisha was there, and the prophets, whenever the prophets came, somebody had a house of the prophet, because they just traveled like an evangelist. And you see, the lady that was there, the Shunammite woman, she was a rich woman, it says, and she was great, and she was noble, and she even could twist others into thinking into her mentality and her way. But while, you see, she was there, and in the natural, she looks like the perfect woman. Because she's there in this place of quietness, and technically speaking to everybody else, she's this noble woman above all. And so she has what they see as a rest in a place of quietness. But you see, the prophet came in, and he knew there was something about her that was beyond, to change her thinking into the faith of God. And it says in verse 8, one day Elisha went to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. So she knew of what he was, and that she wanted something from him. And she said to her husband, behold now, I know that this is a holy man of God, who is continuing passing her way. So she's convinced in her natural state that all is well. Out to what people see her as being well, but in the spirit she's not well. So she knows that this man is well in his spirit, that if she brings her into her place of rest and quietness above all the other people, that she can gain the wellness in spirit and become whole overall. And so it says, let us make him a small room. And you see, this small room that was there, or chamber, it meant a stairway or up on the upper room.
That's right.
So the prophet, the prophet is always a symbolism of the Spirit going forth.
Yes.
So she took him into the upper room, just like in Acts 2, where they were in the upper room and they were seeking the Lord, and the Spirit came upon them, and they received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So she's put in the Spirit room, so she can find that answer that she wants to find.
Yeah.
And it says, let us make him a small room on the roof with walls, and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, a lamp, so that whenever he comes, he can go in there. And the interesting thing about putting the chair there was that the chair, the stool that she placed in that room, is that chair meant green. And green, we think of I think of Psalms 23, where he says it makes us lay down in green pastures. So he's in this place of quiet and in the most restful place that you can enter, because she's the noble woman and dwells in her people. So she's got to rest. So she's bringing him into the rest of her so that he can see her soul. And so he goes in there. And one day he came there, and he turned into the chamber and rested there. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, call the Shunammite. And when he called her, she stood before him. And he said to her, say now to her, see, you have taken all this trouble for us. what is to be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? She answered, I dwell among my own people. So she didn't want, it's like that humbleness that Michelle Donald was talking about. She didn't want fame for herself. She wanted her spirit whole. And you see, Gehazi, that was the go-between between them. And see, Gehazi means valley of the vision. And so, even though he was a servant, he was the one doing the work, not the woman and not the prophet. So he was set ahead to see the peace that was already underway to bring into this woman's faith in the word of the prophet. So, valley of the vision, he's seeing the valley is where the peaceful realm is, where we're walking with the Lord. And he's seeing what her spirit wants to see and passing it in between them back and forth. And that's why they talked to Gehazi. Because they knew, you see, names always meant something. So they kept passing each other between them the peace and the spirit and the faith of God back and forth. And he said, what then is to be done for her? And Gehazi, the one that's that go-between, answered, well, she has no son and her husband is old. So even bringing like the matter of Abraham and Sarah, you know, what is to be done? Because, you know, Sarah, before she conceived, you know, she almost entered a state of that bitterness where she had the faith, but she kept trying to find other natural realms to bring it forth and not in the spirit. And you see, the servant, the go-between there, he kept revealing everything between them. And he said at this season, which season means to have an appointment, and so he's at the season, and it also means like a festival, or the literal meaning, it says the congregation. So in this season, he's appointing her to become into the body mentality of faith and joining up in unity between the three of them. Because, you know, the threes or something, you know, this title has 3 words. And the 3 there, you're having the body, the spirit, and the mind joining together between the prophet. Joining together between those 3 people, and the 3 cord is not easily broken, and that's why your faith rises up when you join up with the body, and then you take Jesus with you, and then it just becomes complete, and that's where you see all is well.
Hallelujah.
And so at this season, he says, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son. Right. And she said, no, my Lord, O man of God, do not lie to your servant. So she was starting to get that convincement, but see, she hadn't been joined up yet with the body. So she's wandering back and forth. She hasn't entered that, you know, she's in that place of rest, but in her spirit, she's not quite there. But it says, but the woman conceived, and she bore a son about that time the following spring, which we know spring, again, is where the change of life starts to come into place. And as Elijah had said to her. And when the child had grown, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. And, you know, I think of Ruth right here, because, you know, Ruth, in Ruth 3, that's where Naomi says to Ruth, I want it to be well with you, because if it's well with you, then it's well with me. And even though I have a bitterness, you can bring the well back into me. And, you know, he's among the reapers, and he's the promise. And he said to his father, oh, my head, my head. And the father said to his servant, carry him to his mother. So he's bringing him in just like when we're in pain, instead of seeking out the opinion of everybody else. That's where we go to our mother. As that verse says about Jesus, that he takes you into his bosom. And that's where his bosom is that place where everything is washed and renewed, just like, you know, the eagle goes and he seeks that dwelling away from everyone else. And he plucks the feathers from himself, and he lets the oil go back on, and lets himself be renewed. So even the natural father knew to send him back to his mother, because she was the one that had conceived the faith and brought it forth. Amen. And when he had lifted him and brought him to his mother, the child sat on her lap till noon. And again, noon there is the light or the window. And we know that been talking about the head in the clouds, and that they're looking at the window through the dove's eyes there. And this light, so there's a changing there.
Hallelujah.
But see, sometimes there's a test of faith, because she's been convinced for a while, but there's a time that sometimes you have to have that convincement, even though it's taken, I think of Charlotte and Chris, she prayed for 17 years for it to come forth, and sometimes he'd come to church during that time and it looked like all was well, but then it wasn't the full convincement yet. He hadn't grown to the full state of maturity where he was ready to be, but she kept praying on and kept believing on that all was well.
Yes.
And it says around noon, and then he died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God. So she knew where he belonged, take him back into the bedchamber where there's intimacy, where she learned that there was a setup of intimacy with the Lord.
Hallelujah.
And shut the door behind him and went out. And that's just like where Jesus, where he prayed for the little girl, and there were doubters, and he said, shut the door and remove all those who do not believe. And then she called to her husband and said, send one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again. And he said, why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. She said, all is well. And you see, that's where most people only went to see, in custom, they only went to see that man of God when there really was a change. But you see, there was a changing already. And that well, it means the safe, happy, friendly, welfare, prosperity, and rest there. See, she's in her place of rest, and there's unrest, so she's got to get the rest back. So she already sees it, and she has the faith. And then she saddled the donkey, and she said to the servant, urge the animal on, do not slacken the pace for me unless I tell you. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. And when the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, remember the valley of the vision. So he's sending forth, riding forth. And he said, look, there is the Shunammite. And he said, run at once to meet her, and say to her, is all well with you? Is all well with your husband? Is all well with the child? And she answered, all is well. And when I think of him sending the valley of the vision, I think of that prodigal son where the father, he didn't just walk to his son, he ran to him and he put the coat and the ring on him, gave him back that identity. And he didn't even let him answer, is all is well. But, the prophet there is taking her and seeing, something's in distress, but I'll make it well, because I know her, what I've implanted into her, and that she's received all that she can ever know of the truth, and know that it's all well. And even though it doesn't seem well, she kept saying, all is well. All is restful. All is safe. All is happy. All is friendly. All is prosperous. And when she came to the mountain to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet. She stopped his journey. She stopped him in his place. And Gehazi tried to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone, for she is in bitter distress. That means that her soul is uneasy, and that the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. So even though there are times where it seems like even Naomi, she was in that bitter state. She had even changed her own identity to bitterness itself. She knew that if she could get a hold of Boaz, she could get a hold of Jesus by the feet, just as Ruth lay before Boaz, before his feet, and he wrapped his wings of his skirt upon her, just as she reached out. The Shunammite woman reached out and grabbed the prophet by the feet. She grabbed a hold of all she knew to be the truth. She knew that it could be well, even though she was bitter and distressed in her soul. And then she said, did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say Do not deceive me. And there deceive means to mislead, to take away the soul of, to kill my spirit. And she saved that prophet. You know, I was happy in my natural state. I didn't have my spirit well, and you gave me the well of the water of the word, and you gave me that convincement that there was a body and a joining of together. But did you take it away from me? Were you taking away my identity? Were you taking away the wellness that was there? Were you allowing my spirit to come out of me where I don't know who I am anymore? But you see, every time, even if we think that we're fallen and we're falling out of a state of wellness, and we might even get bitter and think that we can't even be ourselves, that we can't even share the truth of the word with others, that people, all they see is the negative of our lives. You see, the prophet, he doesn't take it away. Jesus doesn't take away the wellness. He just restores it back to you and reconciles you and just convinces you again that your identity is there. Hallelujah. And he said to Gehazi, tie up your garment and take my staff in your hand and go. You see, the garment was like that was the garment. They always wore ephod. So he took that humbleness with him and the staff to lead the sheep. You know, the prophet, he points the way. So the staff was taken forth, the pointing of the way, and to the humbleness of who you are completely in spirit, where you're stripped down to nothing, and you know that he's taken you and removed you from the blood that's there, and he's cleansed you, and he's married you, and he's loved on you, and he has dressed you in full garments. And he sent that forth to the promise that was already imparted. That even though it seems like it's dead, it's not dead, it's rising up, it's coming. You know, green, you know, there's the chair of the green in there. He's laid upon the bed and there's the green around him where you sit and you rest, and it's around what seems dead, but you know, there's life hidden down in the seed there. And if you meet anyone, do not greet him. So don't let know of the plan. You go with that determinedness of the same as the woman, all is well. And if anyone greets you, do not reply. And lay the staff on the face of the child. And you know, the face is where the breath and the spirit comes in. And so he had to point the way first where the breath and the spirit and the mind are all there together. And he had to lay it upon, because see, whenever you check to see if someone's not dead, the first thing they always check is to see if they have breath there before they check anything else. So he had to send forth his word of convincement that he wasn't dead. And then the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. So even though she was bitter and distressed, she was still holding on to him. She wouldn't leave him, just like Ruth wouldn't leave Naomi. She took her God as her God. She wouldn't let go until she saw the promise and fulfilled her mother-in-law back, because she knew that she had the right way, that she wasn't in the land of incestuous children anymore, that she was in the land of the promised seed of the sons of adoption, of the patterned sons. And so she wouldn't leave that she knew that was the truth. And Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. And therefore he returned to meet him and told him, the child has not awakened. And you know, when we sit on the well, wells are usually quiet. They're down in the deep. And it looks like sometimes there's not any life down there, that sometimes you can't even see the water. But when you go down and you grab a hold of it, and you start pulling the bucket out, and you get the water over and over, you realize that there's a spring of life. It might be hidden down in the darkness, but it keeps coming up. The more that you drink of the water, the fuller that you become, until you're like the woman at the well, where all she knew is she got the living waters, and she got beyond that 6th man into the 7th man, where her husband became Jesus, and that's all she knew. And you see, so there's signs of no life that there's in a darkness, and that even though it's laid upon where the breath and the spirit are coming forth, there's no answer yet. But when Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. And so he went in and he shut the door behind the two of them and prayed to the Lord. And then he went up and he laid on the child. So, and that laying there on the child means to stretch oneself out, to prostrate before him. This is where when you prostrate yourself before the Lord, this is where you went on from praise into a state of worship. And when there's worship, that's where the glory comes to return all life and identity in itself. And then he lay on the child, putting his mouth on his mouth. So putting his word into where the word is going to come out. And his eyes on his eyes. So the dove coming there, where all that's seen and heard is into the child. And his hands on his hands. You know, we lay hands to heal. So he's laid his full self, his worship, and starting to put his spirit back into the promise of what he said that was appointed. Bringing the body back together. And he stretched himself upon him. The flesh of the child became warm. So the life of the prophet, or all that's promised, every part of being, even like when Thomas, he saw the Spirit of the Lord in the glorified state, and he couldn't believe him fully until he had put himself back into what he knew was himself, when he got that tangible. So the prophet's laying before on this child, the promised seed, the finished work. He's laying himself in there. And then he got up again and walked once back and forth in the house, and went up and stretched himself upon him again. And the child sneezed. And that word sneeze there means to turn aside. So he turned aside what was seen as death. And he sneezed 7 times. So in a perfection. Every time he sneezed, he brought the perfection back into himself. And the child opened his eyes. My goodness. The finished work saw the realization of what he really was. That it said the child had grown when he was among the field and he died. So he finally saw the maturity of what he was and what he was meant to be. And then he summoned Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite. And so he called her. And when she came to him, he said, pick up your son. She picked up the grown, mature son of the finished work back into her arms. And she came and she fell at his feet. So she took of what he had planted worship into that child, and she worshiped before what she knew, bowing to the ground, honoring the prophet as the king, but knowing that she was back into her right state, into her wholeness. And she picked up her son and went out. She came and she went. And you know, this prophet entered her quietness of what she saw as being the perfect place. And he rested among her to teach her that body mentality of faith. And though she went through what she thought was a storm, her reassurance was contradicted. All present circumstances had brought her faith to present reality. She knew what the word said. We know the well and all that is promised to exist. We are this woman. Again, we are Mary, who rests at the feet of Jesus and wasn't worried of all that was around her. We became the Ruth that followed what our mother said, that came back into who our true mother was and sought out the feet of Jesus, where we know. And you know, this is where when you're in that state of wellness, you know that nothing is impossible for him. Nothing can be taken away. You know, this mentality can and it has been attained. And you know, the Lord told me this. He said, walk it out, O well daughter of Zion. Nothing has departed from you. Nothing has taken away what you know as truth. I walked in you for you to walk on my well of water, where there's no worry or no fear. It cannot abide there. I've made it well there. You have possessed it. I have come into your world. I have changed your mentality. You are well. say that again. You are well. There is nothing that can change you. You've walked through the midnight and the noon hour, where all natural has died, and the chaff has been burned up. You've been made as gold. You've been watered as a seed, and even though you see yourself sometimes in darkness, that seed still has life. That is, it hasn't been drowned with the water, but it's just been supplemented and supported with the water, that it's growing forth into the garden of Him. And the fields, oh Lord, they are white with light. You see, at that noon hour where you found that light, you don't know anything else but yourself and Him. That's all it's come to. You are reaping among them. I've noticed you, just like in the Song of Solomon, where he saw her as the undefiled and perfect one. He only sees you as his bride, and not the one that he continuously has to see to repent in what the religious world saw. Not a repentance of you have to take away the sin every day and, oh Lord, don't pass me by. But you see, He's brought you to a state of whiteness where cleanness has come. You're wearing the linen ephod and the crown of His might. You become the king and priest of Him under the order of Melchizedek. And you see, He's noticed you. He's wedded you. He's taken you into the chamber of Him. You've kept your thoughts. Keep your thoughts with you, O dove. You are undefiled. My path is in front of you. Walk in the well. You see, the Shunammite woman, she couldn't take her eyes off what she already knew. She became whole and she couldn't take herself from it. The woman at the well was convinced she had to speak to her master, even though it was against the natural law. She had to become this that she knew. She had to become all that she knew. You know, when Paul, and he got that convincement, he was killing what he thought was right because of the law and the religion that came into him. But you see, he became the truth and he started feeding the meat. He started reaping among the fields until he knew all that was God. And he kept going, and sometimes he'd go into what you would see as a bitterness and an estate, into an island. He was sitting in many islands. But you see there, that's where he taught to the pastors. And he taught to the churches. He got that body mentality and he joined up with them. And he was like the prophet, the evangelist that spread the word. And you know, often people thought, they kept thinking back, well, isn't this the noble man? Just like they probably looked at the Shunammite woman and said, isn't this the noble woman? But you see, once you get the seed inside of you, once you get the meat of the word inside of you, that's all. It's a convincement that you say to yourself every day. Not just, it shall be well. It shall be well every day, but it is well. It's not in a future sense. It's always staying in a present sense. And that no matter what happens in your life, in your spirit, in your finances, in your mind, in the emotions of those around you, that nothing can rock the waves of the water, that the water stays still like a well, and that you just keep walking on it like the faith. And the more you get that faith inside of you, the more you are convinced that it's well, and that you keep going up into that higher realm, where you get the hinds feet and you walk upon the mountains and you're not distracted by anything to the right or to the left, but you fly as the dove, pure and whole, and you bring back the olive branch of the oil. See, the olives is where the oil comes, and that's where it convinced Noah that all was well, when he was trying to find the water to see if it had receded. But you see, he was still in the water because the water had to bring the life. And he brought upon his family that altar of worship. And just like the worship of Elisha, where he brought it into the woman. She brought him to bring a state of worship. And he brought it into the child, and he brought it into her. And he kept saying to himself, I know all is well. And he kept bringing it in. The woman was convinced. Even as the woman that had the issue of blood, and she brought herself and knew if she could grab the hem, if she could get a hold of him. If you grab a hold of Jesus completely and don't let anything bother you or worry you, you tell your mind to shut up and you let yourself be, and all is well, no matter what's going on, no matter what's upsetting you, no matter who keeps trying to come at you and keep saying, you know, I don't know about that situation. You know, if you've prayed in your spirit and you've thought to yourself and the Lord has told you over and over, all is well, then believe it. All is well, and don't be swayed. Hallelujah. So that's what all I want to tell you this morning is that all is well. All is well. All is well in your spirit, in your body, in your mind, and emotions, every realm of you. All is well. Hallelujah.
Yeah.